Guatemala City, 1976. A TV crew is shooting a commercial when they suddenly spot something strange flying overhead. To this day, no one has been able to identify it. But as spectacular as it appears, this videotape and other forms of pictorial evidence have only limited value in our understanding of UFOs. Richard Haynes is a research scientist who has studied many photographs.
In order to make sense out of photographic evidence, it's extremely important to know a great deal about the photographer, about the camera system he uses, about the development process that is used, and in general about the context in which the picture was taken. Oftentimes we come across photographic evidence long after the fact, and because of that we don't have much of that fine detail information that we need to do a good systematic analysis.
But with the development of sophisticated image enhancement equipment, investigators can gain new information from photographs. Haynes demonstrated how this can be done by analyzing this particular photograph. The picture of a tiny object trailing a plane has long been considered by ufologists to be a good example of photographic evidence of a UFO. But skeptics claim the object is really something on the ground. To try to settle the question, Haynes had the photograph put through a process called color enhancement. This gives the picture more detail, allowing Haynes to do a more extensive analysis.
What our analysis has just shown of the digitization of this photograph is that the darkness of this major disc-shaped image right here is very close to the same darkness as the tail structure here of the airplane, the wing tank, and the main body. And we find that there's no objects on the ground at that equivalent range with the equivalent darkness. Now, what this suggests then is that in fact it's an airborne object.
But even faux enhancement equipment has its limits.
In the final analysis, however, we're stuck with an image of something we don't understand. If that enhancement process shows the image to be an airplane outline, we're home free. But on the other hand, if it shows a symmetrical airform, an oblate spheroid, for instance, with no means of propulsion or support or lift, we're right back where we started, you see. So photographic analysis must be coupled with a very creative approach on the part of the photo interpreter.
So without additional evidence, photographs of UFOs really prove nothing at all. But when there is additional evidence, ufologists believe that they can make a strong case. And right now, we look at one of their strongest. No other pictorial evidence has created as much interest as these images shot from an airplane during the early morning hours of December 31st, 1978. This is the New Zealand film, considered by most experts to be the single strongest evidence of a UFO ever captured on film. To most of us, it may not seem impressive, a small, bright light in the night sky off the New Zealand coast. But it is the only case of a UFO that was seen by several pilots and crew members, picked up on radar and photographed on several thousand frames of 16mm color film shot by a TV crew.
It appears to have a brightly lit bottom and a transparent sort of sphere on top, so it appears to be, well, like a flying saucer.
No one has studied the New Zealand film more than this man. Bruce Maccabee is a physicist who spent over a year analyzing the film.
Now, my claim is that having looked at the film and the whole sighting in general, that the film shows objects which cannot be identified by conventional means.
To arrive at that conclusion, Maccabee first flew the same route in which the sightings were made. He set out to disprove one of the first conventional explanations offered, that the object was a celestial body, like Venus.
The lights that they were talking about was below the level of that mountain range. In other words, silhouetted against the mountain range, if you wish, rather than above the mountain range. So I don't see any celestial body that could have done that. Also, if you look at the image carefully, you will see it does strange things, like when it tends to fade out, it changes its shape from being sort of oval to sort of thin in a vertical direction, and then just fades out.
Other skeptics suggested that the light came from squid boats, which use bright lights to draw squid to the water surface. To eliminate that possibility, Maccabee made a direct comparison between a squid boat light and the light in the film.
The squid boat picture clearly shows a reflection in the water extending underneath the image of the squid boat, sort of a dull reddish triangular reflection extending downwards. In none of the images in this UFO film have I been able to find any indication of a reflection in the water, which you would expect if it's a squid boat.
According to air controllers, their radar picked up the object and estimated the distance to the airplane at between 10 to 20 miles. Using a densitometer, an instrument that measures film density, Maccabee was able to determine the object's brightness.
If the light source had been, for example, 10 nautical miles away, then it was putting out a power equivalent to several 100,000 watts worth of incandescent light bulbs. A several 100,000 watt source is not a small amount of power. That's an awful lot of energy being used up, and they saw this thing for 15 minutes, so it must have been a considerable source of power by itself.
But the most amazing conclusion that Maccabee reached centered on these last few feet of film, shown here in extremely slow motion. It shows the object flashing from bright white to a dim red and then orange color.
The periodicity of this flashing is essentially perfect for 30 cycles. Now, such a regular flashing of a light implies intelligent control. We could find no human-made light source to account for it. So the periodicity suggests intelligence, and yet we can't find any conventional explanation. So that suggests that we have some sort of an intelligence on our hands here, and that removes it beyond the pale of science, I'm afraid.
No one has yet been able to refute any of Maccabee's work. He believes that the significance of the New Zealand film goes far beyond the scope of just one case.
The hard evidence left over in this case suggests we have something which cannot be explained in conventional terms, and that opens up a new field of investigation in science. It suggests that we should go back and rethink what we've been saying about other UFO cases.
October 25th, 1975. Fighter planes are sent in hot pursuit after an unidentified flying object seen hovering over missile sites at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. NORAD, the North American Air Defense, reports that the jets failed to intercept the object. For the next 2 months, NORAD recorded other sightings of UFOs over missile launching sites and nuclear weapons storage areas in Michigan, Maine, and North Dakota. In all cases, our jets were unable to overtake the objects. The 1975 sightings show us dramatically that unidentified flying objects have invaded our airspace. And yet, since 1969, the federal government's position has been that it is not interested in investigating UFOs. It was in 1969 that the Air Force ended Project Blue Book, a 21-year investigation of UFOs. Their basic conclusion was that lack of evidence warranted no further study of the matter.
There was no evidence of threat to national security. There was no evidence that we had been visited by extraterrestrial vehicles. And finally, there was no evidence that after evaluating these UFO sightings, that there was any indication of scientific knowledge, the existence of scientific knowledge beyond the present state of knowledge.
But government documents on the NORAD incidents, as well as thousands of other reports, reveal that the government continues to investigate a phenomenon that is much more than just a few isolated incidents. Since 1969, as many as 10 governmental agencies have been involved in UFO inquiries, including the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, and the Air Force. Attorney Peter Gersten has led the fight to unearth these documents on behalf of a group called Citizens Against UFO Secrecy.
The documents confirm the reality of these unconventional objects, and there is furthermore evidence that these objects exhibit a technology that is beyond present-day technology, an advanced technology, a more sophisticated technology.
A graphic example of that technology was reported in this document about an incident on September 19, 1976 in Iran. An F-4 jet similar to this one was sent to intercept unusual objects seen over the city of Tehran. As the F-4 approached the brilliant object, the jet lost all instrumentation and communication. Later, when the jet tried to shoot a missile at a second object, the F-4's weapon control panel went dead.
What makes this incident interesting and significant is that it involves the malfunction of an American-made defensive tactical weapon system, specifically an F-4 jet. The interesting part of the incident is that the Defense Intelligence Agency did an evaluation of the incident and found the incident to be a classic UFO case because of eyewitness verification, confirmed by radar, and so forth.
Documents show repeatedly that UFOs have been able to penetrate our military airspace. In one incident in 1980, UFOs were seen over Kirkland Air Force Base in New Mexico. The base is a highly sensitive installation that includes an advanced weapons research laboratory. Documents show that bright objects were able to land at the base undetected by radar. When security police tried to pursue the objects, they took off.
UFOs pose a threat to national security for many reasons, the first of which relate to the general principle that these objects have been unable to be identified by this government for the last 35 years.
Abducted, and a volunteer who is told to imagine an abduction. The result? Both stories are similar.
What is it that you're seeing?
They're shapes, and they're looking down at me.
They're tall and slim, with large eyes, long fingers.
It's like this bright light in their heads looking down at me. But they're like shadows.
Mm-hmm.
And something's passing across.
Yes.
It's sort of like a piece of something.
They're looking into my eyes. There's no communication that they know what I'm thinking. No verbal communication.
It's like they're bleeping something at me, like electrical impulses or something.
In general, the imaginary and the real experiences, as we've experienced them here, are identical. I mean, there are no real substantive differences. All of these indicate to me that, and to my colleagues, I'm sure, that the imaginary or that the abduction narratives aren't real physical experiences. That is, they're not aliens coming here. And they indicate, however, that the people believe that something might well have happened to them. This is what's so fascinating. I think something quite real in psychological terms is happening to these people. I don't think little green men are doing it. I think we're doing it, or the mind is doing it to us.
Experiments by Lawson, McCall, and others seem to prove that abductions are essentially psychological. This does not invalidate them, however, and they are still happening to people all over the world. It's up to the researchers to find out why.